So, good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I hope you can see my slides now. I assume so. Yes, I see Lisa nodding. Well, thank you, first of all, Lisa, for inviting me for this webinar and giving our presentation. I also think I should give a warm thanks to Ian Cousins, because I think he made an excellent presentation explaining why there is a problem with PFAS and why, well, at least in Europe, we are willing to act on it and to ban the use of PFAS. So that makes my story a bit easier. So now it has to move to the next one, yes. So I have 3 topics in my presentation. So we'll first say a little bit about the PFAS debate that is ongoing in the Netherlands, and I'm sure in other countries similar debates are ongoing, and which is well, underpinning the need for action. Then I will say a little bit about REACH, because that's the most important European chemical legislation which dealing with these issues. I think it's important to know a little bit about it. And then I will move to the plans we have to restrict the use of PFAS in Europe. So, well, I could have taken the similar pictures as Professor Cousins did, but I took some from the Netherlands. So actually, there has been a lot of debate during the last, I would say, 5-6 years on the use of PFAS in the Netherlands. Well, this is mainly started with the environmental pollution of the polymerization age used by Chemours. They have a factory in the Netherlands near Dordrecht. They switched from PFOA to GenX, and both substances are released to the environment, and we see well, quite high environmental concentrations in these areas. And that led to several questions in Parliament. That's the picture at the right top. A lot of questions, actually a lot of debates. And also the Dutch government started to act on it. Due to the pollution, they say you cannot spread the pollution, which resulted in that there was no possibility in the Netherlands to move soil and sediments around. Well, in the Netherlands, we do that a lot to keep our waterways free, so you can still use boats and use the waterways. There is a lot of transport of soil for new houses to be built, and this was all blocked due to the PFAS actions by the government, and that that's resulted in demonstrations in The Hague where people come with trucks, etc., because they can't do their work anymore. So it's a highly political situation in the Netherlands right now. And if I'm then looking to my institute, the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment, RIVM, you see that until 2019, we mainly did several researches in the region of Chemours plant in Dordrecht. So we looked to the PFOA emissions, we took samples from blood, water, etc. And also we looked to the GenX as an alternative for PFOA. But after 2019, it was discovered that there is a widespread pollution and there is a need for action. So this also raised at our side more studies, and not only at our institute, but also other institutes, to have a more national view on the pollution. And there is also now an action plan to address PFAS at the source. Partly is by having a restriction on the manufacturing use of PFAS, which I will talk a bit more on later in the presentations, but also doing some national actions to prevent further distribution of the PFAS. In this slide, quite an overview is given of all the activities ongoing in the Netherlands, and I will not show them all, but actually you have different places. Of course, you have the emission at the factory site, but it's ending up in the food, so in the food chain, it's ending up in the environment. We have, of course, the historical pollution with, from the firefighting foams. So there are a lot of different actions taken in the Netherlands to see where are the main PFAS sources in the Netherlands, and where is the exposure to either the environment or to human. So a lot of activities ongoing. And now I will go to the European legislation as mentioned. So the REACH legislation, because that's also fitting into the restriction part. So REACH, and I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with REACH, stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization and Restriction of Chemicals. And REACH is aiming to have a high level of protection of human health and the environment in Europe. And it places the responsibility of the safe use for chemicals at the company level. So if you don't deliver data on the risk and the toxic profile of your substances, you shouldn't have access to the market. Specific attention is paid to substances of very high concern due to the hazard properties, so carcinogenic substances, but also persistent, bioaccumulative and toxic substances are to be substituted within REACH. And there is one, and that's the restriction part, where it said if there is an unacceptable risk, authorities can restrict the use of a substance by setting any condition to manufacture, placing on the market and use of this substance. And if you read the sentence, you can see that it is a very broad description. So actually, it is not always a ban or so a complete ban of a substance, but you also can set a condition to manufacture. So for example, as discussed after the presentation of Ian Cousins, you could discuss whether you should restrict the use of PFAS polymerization aids during manufacturing. That could be a possibility. So you see there are a lot of options there to act as from the authority side.
Sorry, may I ask you a question?
I'm not sure if we do that in between the presentation or after. So
yes, yes, I'm from ILAC. We are producing non-stick coatings, mainly often based on fluoropolymers too. And I wonder if REACH is an instrument to forbid materials, non-dangerous materials. I think REACH is foreseen for restriction of dangerous substances, correct?
It's about substances and mixtures, and as I would say, polymers are also substances. So
no, they are materials. They are materials like stainless steel.
Thanks a lot, but I think we take this in the last session, please.
Okay.
Or after the presentation, yes. We will come back to that.
Okay, I will continue then. And we've seen that in Europe, but also globally, several PFAS substances are already restricted. So by the Global Stockholm Convention, PFOA and PFOS, and you now all know the acronyms, are restricted globally. And within Europe, the REACH restriction, we are working on several other substances. So the more long chain PFAS substances, they are now decided on within the REACH committee, which is the deciding committee in Brussels, to restrict the use of them. And discussions are ongoing for the C6 substances, either the sulfonic acids or the carboxylic acids. One restriction which is upcoming is the restriction of all PFAS in firefighting foams. Just last week, ECHA has submitted its dossier onto it, and then the process starts that an opinion by RAC and SEAC is needed, and then a decision by the Commission. But I will come back to that later on when I explain the PFAS restriction in more detail. So there are already activities going on. So although there is still a lot of concern, of course, on the PFAS and the environmental pollution, I think already quite some action has been taken on different levels, both on the global level and the European level. Another important document to mention here is the Chemical Strategy for Sustainability. And that was published in 2020 by the European Commission. And now we have an ongoing discussion. And this strategy also contains a PFAS staff working document. And there it's very clear that the Commission is aiming to ban all PFAS as a group in firefighting foams and also in other uses. They also would like that PFAS are addressed as a group. Also explained that by the common concern of persistency, there's a need to address these concerns on a global scale because, of course, it is a global market, and also the pollution will move through the market, especially the shorter PFAS substances are quite mobile, so with waterways, they can easily go crossing borders and crossing continents. There is a need to remediate PFAS contamination, and of course, we also should look to substitutes of PFAS, which is also the topic of today's meetings. So I think there are a lot of things in the pipeline here on the PFAS and trying to solve the issues around environmental pollution of PFAS. And then moving to the PFAS restrictions, which we are working on. So I will explain a little bit about the timing and intention, the chemical scope, but I can be very brief over there. And then going to the uses, including food contact material. So we took, as the Netherlands, the initiative to restrict the use of all PFAS as a group. We announced it during an Environmental Council in 2019, and we agreed with 4 other countries in Europe to work together on this. So Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark have now already started in the beginning of 2020 to work together to prepare a restriction proposal for these PFAS. And we invited interested parties to send in evidence and information on the use of PFAS. And this was also published on ECHA's webpage. And as mentioned, the concern about all the PFAS is the persistency. And it was clearly explained by Ian Cousins that all PFAS have as a common concern that they are extremely persistent in the environment. Once in there, they will be there forever. And there are supporting concerns related to the bioaccumulation or the mobility or the toxicity. But that's not the difference within the group. If you then look to the timing of our work, so we had from May to July 2020 a call for evidence to gather all this information. We tried to capture all this information in reports and summaries of it. But as also explained already, PFAS is used a lot in many applications. So it was quite a hard work to get this overview. So we did the best. I think we started about 15 studies on different uses. But we had the feeling we would like to challenge ourselves and so we presented these summary reports of our studies and asked stakeholders, industry companies, but also NGOs to reflect on the findings we had so far. So we had a second consultation round last year, and this also gave a lot of reaction, which is good. So we received many comments for improvement, which I only can thank you for, because that helped us preparing a good restriction dossier, because you want to have a good overview of the uses. And if you want to ban something or restrict it, you want to know what is the impact in the market of it. So we formally noted our intention to ECHA. So that's then it's out there that you preparing a restriction dossier. That's a registry of intention. And this year, July, we are aiming to submit the dossier. After submitting the dossier, and that's on the next slide, we are aiming to come on with a restriction by the end of, during 2025. But after we have submitted the dossier, and I think that's valuable for you to know, there will be again 2 public consultations. So 2 scientific committees of ECHA will prepare its opinion, and part of that, there are 2 public consultations, and then again, stakeholders have the possibility to provide information. And I would encourage you to use these consultations, especially also on the alternatives, because that's an important part for considering if alternatives are available. Maybe some advertisement for our own work. So we explained what we are doing in an e-magazine. The link is on the bottom of the slide, but I think they will be shared and it's in English. So there are several interviews with key players in Europe on the PFAS restriction. And there also the timelines are explained a little bit more detail. The scope, Of the aim of the restriction is to cover this wide scope as already explained. So it's including fluoropolymers, it's including side chain fluorinated polymers, it's also including gases. And as said many times, there are so many uses of PFAS, and especially on the fluoropolymers, and you can see all these different applications, but there are much more of them. And we want to cover them in our dossier. So I mentioned that we started several studies, and you can see the topics of our studies at the right side of the slide. And in these studies, we want to see how much of PFAS is used in these applications, what are the emissions, what are the alternatives, what is the functionality, etc., to try to get this picture. And preferably, it's not only a picture, but it is a film, because it's not what is today, but also the expectations towards the future. Because if we think it will increase enormously, we have to also describe it in the shade. That would be of much value. So we also made a study for food contact material and packaging. And it's a bit hard to, of course, present here all the results of the report, because the presentation will get too long, but we really describe all the different uses, or try to describe as much as possible the different uses in this sector. So I wrote it down for the consumer cookware. There it's used in frying pans, baking trays, bake pans, saucepans, etc., etc., etc. And for the other categories, we did the same. So then you have a real good view on the PFAS use in these sectors. And the next step then is that we are making we are calculating based on sources from the stakeholder consultation, from literature, how much PFAS are used and which type of PFAS are used. And I didn't fill in the tonnages yet because, well, we have numbers, but they are still draft. So I, rather than spreading around numbers which will be changed over time, I just leave out the numbers. But now you can see at least how a dossier or part of the dossier will look like. So you see the packaging, paper and board with the tonnage, they are polymers, and the source of these tonnages. And the same then again, because the tonnage is interesting. What more interesting is, of course, the emission to the environment. And then you get the same kind of information. So these are the basis of the information we will put in the restriction dossier and then base our proposal on it. And such a proposal will look something like this. This is how restriction proposals within REACH will look like. So you have in column A, it's a definition for which substances it is covered. So it can be any substance, but in this case, it's are the PFASs. And then you have at the right column, there's stated, it shall not be manufactured, used, placed in the market, or etc. And then you have, of course, more paragraphs because it will mean not be this short. And you have a possibility there to derogate some of the uses. And maybe we need also in the food contact materials or packaging derogate some of its use because we don't see an alternative and it has a high value in society. That's a discussion on the proportionality of your restriction. So there can be some derogations for this. And how many and how much, that's to be determined the coming year. And of course, the intention, at least from the policy side in the Netherlands, is to have a very limited amount of derogations. But of course, if there is a need and if it can be demonstrated, that will be put into the proposal. After we have submitted the proposal, the dossier to ECHA, then I said that these public consultations will run, RAC and CERC will provide his opinions. And then, of course, it's moved to Brussels. And there, in the end, a decision is taken. A commission will prepare a proposal and a decision within the European member states will be voted. So when we submit our dossier, we did our job and we try to do it the best we can, but it's only one step in the process. It's not there yet. It's up for discussion then. So then I'm coming to a final slide because I thought it was clearly showing the effect of legislation in Europe. It was a presentation by an NGO in the Netherlands, and they looked to the use of PFAS in paper and board as food contact materials at the McDonald's. And there you see in Denmark there is a restriction for using PFAS, in these packaging by McDonald's, and there they indeed didn't found any PFAS in it, whereas in the Czech Republic and United Kingdom, they did found. Unfortunately, they didn't analyze the products in the Netherlands, because that would be interesting for me as well. For the food contact materials, especially the paper and board, there is some national legislation in all countries. There is some freedom there. In the Netherlands, we had 4 PFAS substances on the positive list, so it could be used in the paper and board packaging, but it's now starting April 1st, I think this year, is 3 of them are removed, so only 1 PFAS is left so far. And with that, I would like to end my presentation and free for your questions.